In 1982, when I moved from Clearwater, Florida to New Orleans, and Roz and I began our life together, I did some homework on the origins of the Christian faith in the Deep South, and in sifting through the archives, I came across a fascinating piece of information. 100 years ago in the Deep South, a phrase so commonplace in our Christian culture today, the phrase born again, was seldom or never used. Rather, the phrase used to describe the breakthrough into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ was, I was seized by the power of a great affection. Today somebody might say, I was born again on June 4th of 1980. 100 years ago, a person in Louisiana or Mississippi or Alabama would say on June 4th, 1880, I was seized by the power of a great affection. These words are a profoundly human and moving way to describe both the initiative of God and the explosion within the human heart when Jesus, instead of being some vague, distant, abstract figure in outer space, or a face on a holy card with long hair and a robe with many folds, suddenly became alive, real, and Lord of one's personal and professional life. Seized by the power of a great affection was a visceral description of the phenomenon of Pentecost, authentic conversion, and the release of the Holy Spirit. Seized by the power of a great affection lent new meaning to the old Russian proverb, those who have the disease called Jesus will never be cured. In March of last year, I was privileged to spend an afternoon with an Amish family in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was giving a weekend retreat up in Lancaster, and my two hosts, two Christian psychologists, Joe and Kathy Anders, said Saturday morning, look, we've got the morning and the afternoon free. Would you like to go visit an Amish family? I said, oh, I would love to. I've got this enormous respect and the admiration for the Amish people because of their immense courage to be faithful to their own convictions, to carve out a style of life, often getting a lot of flack from other people, but a vision that really corresponds to their uniqueness, embodies their own vision, and they had a dream. The dream has given definition to their lives, and they've really given flesh to that dream. I said, I would love to go. And I said, besides, I saw the movie Witness, so that must make me eminently qualified. Well, we arrive at the house of Jonas Zook, who's an 82-year-old widower, and Jonas and his children raise piglets for a living. The oldest, Barbara, is 57 years old. She manages the household. And the three younger children, Rachel, 53, Elam, 47, and Sam, 45, are all severely retarded. When I arrived at noon with Joe and Kathy, little Elam, standing about 4 feet tall, he's heavy set, thickly bearded, wearing the black Amish outfit, with the circular black hat, the black vest, the white shirt, the black pants, the high black boots. He's coming out of the barn some 50 yards away with a pitchfork in his hand. Now, this little retarded boy had never seen me in his entire life, and yet when I stepped out of the car, he dropped his pitchfork, and he came running lickety-split in my direction. 2 feet away, he flung himself at me, wrapped his arms around my neck, his legs around my waist, and he kissed me with his thick black beard. He kisses me on the lips with fierce intensity for a full 30 seconds. Well, I was temporarily stunned and terribly self-conscious, but in the twinkle of an eye, Jesus set me free from propriety and empowered me to do something I'd never done in my life before. I kissed a man on the lips. I buried my lips into Elam's and returned his kiss with the same enthusiasm. Well, then he jumped down. He wraps both his hands around my right arm, and he leads me on a tour of the farm. A half hour later, at a lovely luncheon prepared by Barbara, Elam sat next to me. Midway through the meal, I turned around to say something to my friend Joe Anders, and inadvertently, my elbow banged into Elam's ribcage. He didn't wince. He didn't groan. He wept like a 2-year-old child. You know what he did then? He came over to my chair, planted himself on my lap, and he kissed me on the eye, on the nose, on the forehead, on the cheek, on the lips again, and then rested his little head on my shoulder and stared into my eyes. And there was Brennan, dazed, dumbstruck, weeping, and suddenly seized by the power of a great affection. In the bright darkness of faith, little Elam Zook was an icon of Jesus Christ. Why? Because at that moment his love for me did not depend on any lovability of mine. It was not conditioned by any response on my part. He loved me whether I was kind or unkind, nice or nasty. His love arose from a source outside of himself, outside of myself. And as often happens in a profound moment like that, I'll recall a line that I've read in a book years earlier. It was a book on Native Americans talking about their tragic history, and the author noted that the Iroquois Indians attributed divinity to retarded children, gave them an honored place in the tribe because they were incapable of malice, and treated them as gods. In their unself-conscious freedom, they were a transparent window into the Great Spirit, in our context, into the heart of Jesus Christ, who loves us as we are, not as we should be, beyond worthiness and unworthiness, beyond fidelity and infidelity, who loves us in the state of grace or disgrace, beyond caution, regret, boundary, limit, or breaking point. My brothers and sisters, in a world that is torn and tearing, it takes a touch of folly to believe that even when our choices are destructive and their consequences hurtful, God's love remains unwavering. It takes a touch of folly to believe that regardless of our insulation and defensiveness, God is constantly open and vulnerable to us. As the sea of suffering humanity swells, we are hard-pressed for proofs that the crucified, risen Jesus has prevailed over every principality, power, and dominion, discarded them like a garment, and led them captive in his victory procession. The sad plight of Native Americans is a haunting memory that refuses to go away. They're homeless, having lost their culture, their land, their pride, and their hope. Refugees from Afghanistan, Haiti, Cuba, and the South Pacific Islands stream to our shores and are often deposited in slums and barrios, unfit for human habitation. Bag ladies, derelicts, and the mentally disturbed stalk the streets of our cities. Small farmers are wiped out by the encroachment of agribusiness. Strip mining has wantonly raped the land. White-collar crime on Wall Street and governmental fraud in Washington devastate American morale. AIDS victims are ostracized and shunned as undesirables. The drug epidemic ravages our youth and puts all our tomorrows up for grabs. Venal clergymen are a dime a dozen. Anti-Semitism and racism are scars on the national conscience. After 2,000 years, the body of Christ is still dreadfully divided by doctrine, history, and by day-to-day living. Scabrous stories about Christian disunity pepper the pages of periodicals and newspapers. The body of truth in the United States is bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Small wonder, my friends, that many Christians today are bedraggled, beat up, and burnt out. The bleak landscape of the global village has introduced discouragement, disillusionment, and what Parker Palmer calls functional atheism, that is, the belief that nothing's happening unless we're making it happen. Though our Christian language pays lip service to God, our way of functioning assumes that God is either dead or in a coma. Being seized by the power of a great affection does not seem to relate to the real world in which we live. Does it not require a fair measure of lunacy to listen to the Looney Tunes of the ragamuffin gospel? Indeed it does. As Zorba the Greek said to his employer, "It's difficult, boss, very difficult. You need a touch of folly to do it." Folly, do you see? You have to risk everything. In the final analysis, my brothers and sisters, discipleship is a life of sublime madness. The truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ does not rise and fall on the issues of corrupt clergy, the exploitation of the poor, the stinginess of multinationals, or the irrational fanaticism of some modern dictatorships. The ragamuffin gospel deserves to be accepted or rejected for what it is, an answer to the most fundamental questions any person may ask. Is life absurd? Or does it have a purpose? Jesus replies, not only do our lives have a purpose, but God has directly intervened in human affairs to make abundantly clear what that purpose is. What's the nature of ultimate reality? Jesus responds that the really real is generous, forgiving, saving love. In the end, will life triumph over death? With unshaken confidence, Jesus answers, the kingdom of my Father cannot be overcome, even by death. In the end, everything will be all right. Nothing can harm you permanently. No loss is lasting. No defeat more than transitory. No disappointment conclusive. Suffering, failure, loneliness, sorrow, discouragement, and death will be part of your journey, yes. But the kingdom of God will conquer all these horrors. No evil can resist the grace of God forever. My friends, if you reject the ragamuffin gospel and turn your back on Christianity, do so because you find the answers of Jesus simply incredible, blasphemous, or hopelessly hopeful. Reject Christianity, if you will, out of motives of cynicism. Turn away from it because you believe that ultimate reality is malign and punitive. Choose a God that is cantankerous, vindictive, or forgetful, or determined to keep man and woman in their place. Do that if such a God is more to your choosing. If you cannot accept the idea that love is at the core of the universe, that's your privilege. If you don't believe that the absolute, the really real, passionately wants to be your friend and your lover, then by all means reject such a seemingly absurd notion. If you do not believe that we still have the enthusiasm, the strength, the courage, and the creativity to love one another as friends, then quickly cast aside such an incredible idea into the trash can. And if you think it's ridiculous to believe that life will triumph over death, then don't bother with Christianity, because you can't be a Christian unless you believe that. In first century Palestine, the people of Judea and Galilee fudged and hedged on the proclamation of the reign of God. Jesus announced that the old era was done, that a new age had dawned, and that the only appropriate response to the gospel of grace was to be captivated with joy and wonder. Captivated with joy and wonder. But his listeners did not say, yes, Rabbi, we believe you, or no, Rabbi, we think you're a fool. Rather, they said, wait a minute, what about the sap-sucking Romans? And when are you going to produce an apocalyptic sign? And why aren't you and your disciples within the Jewish law? And by the way, whose side do you take in the various legal controversies? Jesus replied that the Romans were not the issue, the law was not the issue, and cosmic miracles were not the issue. The relentless love of God was the issue, and in the face of that revelation, the Romans and the Torah were secondary. But his audience stubbornly refused to concede that the Torah could possibly be secondary, or that the Roman domination of Palestine could be marginal. The Torah and Rome, these were the relevant issues, the gut problems. What do you have to say about them, Rabbi? Once again, Jesus responded. He had not come to discuss the law or to challenge the Roman Empire. He had come to herald the good news that the really real is love, and to invite men and women to a joyous response to that love. And the sober, hard-headed, realistic critics simply shook their heads in dismay. Is he ever going to address the critical questions? Since the day that Jesus appeared on the scene, we have developed vast theological systems, organized worldwide churches, filled libraries with brilliant Christological scholarship, my own 8 books among them, ho ho. We have engaged in earth-shaking controversies and embarked on crusades, reforms, and renewals. And yet, there are still precious few of us with sufficient folly to make the mad exchange of everything for Christ. Only a remnant today with the reckless, raging confidence to risk everything on the gospel of grace. Only a minority who stagger about with the delirious joy of the man who has found the buried treasure, or the baffled happiness of the prodigal son showered with gifts by a father who had every reason to ignore him. It was cynicism, pessimism, and despair that shadowed the ministry of Jesus. And as the old French proverb goes, plus ça change, plus ça m'aime. The more things change, the more they stay the same. At the risk of sounding like a country cracker cowboy preacher, allow me, my friends, to raise some intimate personal questions about your real relationship with Jesus of Nazareth. Do you live each day in the blessed assurance that you have been saved by the unique grace of our Lord Jesus Christ? After falling flat on your face, are you still firmly convinced that the fundamental structure of reality is not works but grace? Are you moody and melancholy because you're still striving for the perfection that comes from your own efforts and not from faith in Jesus Christ? Are you shocked and horrified when you fail? Have you forgotten to remember that glorious hour when you were seized by the power of a great affection? Are you really aware that you don't have to change, grow, or be good to be loved by the Lord? Rather that you're loved so that you will change, grow, and be good? Are you conscious of the breath of the Father on your face? Are you intoxicated by the eschatological vision of a new age? After reading the latest horror story in the daily newspaper, are you as gloomy and downcast as your unbelieving neighbor? Are you as certain of the triumph of good over evil as the fermentation of dough by yeast? Are your eyes sad? Is your heart heavy and dull? Is your contagious faith leading others to suspect that you have indeed found a long-lost Van Gogh painting in your attic? Though on a given day you might be more depressed than anything else, is the general orientation of your life toward peace and joy? As you listen to this tape, are you living a life of carefree faith and reckless trust? Are you diminished by other people's perception of you? Are you diminished by your own definition of yourself? Do you possess that touch of folly to transcend doubt, fear, and self-hatred, and truly accept that you are accepted? If not, well then, my friend, you probably belong to the brotherhood of the bedraggled, beat up, and burnt out. You may feel discouraged or distraught, frightened or frustrated, angry or anxious, powerless or purposeless, overextended or underappreciated, flamed out or just plain worn out. You may feel like a charred log in a fireplace, totally drained of energy and unable to light a fire in yourself. Your personal inner resources appear to be exhausted. The Christian writer Louis Savory described the brotherhood of the beat-up, bedraggled, and burnt out this way. Their life is full of demands from others. They seem to be living at least 3 different lives. Everyone wants a piece of them. They can't say no, yet they have no time to do what they've already said yes to. They cannot seem to find the necessary clarity and information on which to base decisions. They make a great investment in relationships and get little gratitude, feedback, or even acknowledgement from others. Although non-reciprocity is inevitable and acceptable, it's also draining. No one can function long in a helping profession without feeling its impact. My friends, the first step toward rejuvenation of your inner life calls for a touch of folly. And by that I mean simply accept that that's where you are and expose your poverty, frailty, and emptiness to the love that is everything. Don't try to feel anything, think anything, or do anything, because with all the goodwill in the world, you cannot make anything happen. Don't force prayer. Simply relax in the presence of the God you half believe in and ask for a touch of folly. The Indian poet Tagore once put it this way: no, it's not yours to open buds into blossom. Shake the bud, strike it. It's beyond your power to make it blossom. Your touch soils it. You tear its petals to pieces and strew them in the dust. But no colors appear and no perfume. Oh, it is not for you to open the bud into blossom. He who can open the bud does it so simply. He gives it a glance, and the life sap stirs through its veins. At his breath, the flower spreads its wings and flutters in the wind. Colors flash. They flash out like heart longings. The perfume betrays a sweet secret. He who can open the bud does it so simply. My brothers and sisters, try this simple exercise in faith. Right now, gently close your eyes. Assume any position that's comfortable to you, as long as your spine is straight. That's so that the blood will flow freely through the rest of your body and you won't get uncomfortable. But it's okay to stand, sit, kneel, lie on your back, just bend your knees so the spine will be straight. Now, in faith, walk down a stairway from your head, the top of your head down into your heart. Hear the word of Jesus, make your home in me, dwell in me, abide in me. See Jesus looking at you. Eye contact here is very important. See him look at you perhaps the way he glanced at the Apostle John in the upper room on the night before he died. In an incredible gesture of intimacy, this young man laid his head on the chest of Jesus. Jesus turned and looked at the one described as the disciple that Jesus loved. See Jesus looking at you that way? Or perhaps the way he looked at the sinful woman washing his feet with her tears and drying them with her hair. Hear Jesus say, her many sins are forgiven her because of her great love. Now, for 10 minutes, pray over the first verse, the first strophe of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. Just turn the tape off. For 10 minutes, just pray over that one psalm, that one verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And then, for the next 10 minutes of your prayer, pray over this passage from Hosea, and wherever you see the word Israel, replace it with your own name. This is Hosea 11, verses 1, 3 and 4, 8 and 9. Israel, how could I give you up? My heart turns against it. When Israel was a child, I loved him. I myself taught him how to walk. I took him in my arms. Yet he has not understood that I was the one looking after him. I led him with reins of kindness, with leading strings of love. I was like someone who lifts up an infant close to his cheek. Stooping down to him, I gave him his food. How could I treat you like Admah, or make you like Seboim? My heart recoils against it. My whole being trembles at the thought. I will not give rein to my fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again. For I am God, not man. I am the Holy One in your midst, and have no wish to destroy. For the last 5 minutes of this faith exercise, this time of prayer, read aloud and slowly these 3 texts. First, Hosea 2, 14 through 17. This is why I'm going to lure her and lead her into the wilderness and speak to her heart. I'm going to give her back her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a gateway of hope. Then she will respond to me as she did when she was young, and as she did when she came out of the land of Egypt. The second text is Isaiah 49, verses 1, 14, and 15. The Lord called me from the womb. From the body of my mother he named my name. Does a woman forget her baby at the breast, or fail to cherish the son of her womb? Yet even if she forget, I will never forget you. See, I have branded you in the palm of my hand. Your ramparts are always under my eye. And finally, Romans 8, 31 and 32. In the face of all this, what is there left to say? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not hesitate to give what was most precious to himself, gave as a matter of fact over into our hands. Can we not trust that such a God will give us with him everything else we need? My brothers and sisters, if you ever have the opportunity to celebrate Easter in France, whether you're in a large metropolitan area like Paris, Bordeaux, or Dijon, or Nice, or in a little tiny village like I was in, in Saint-Rémy, about 60 kilometers northeast of Dijon, you'll see this one phrase on Easter morning written on the sides of buildings. It'll be written on the backs of buses. It'll be in block print. It'll be in script. You'll hear this one phrase sung, chanted, recited in all the churches on Easter morning. When people pass one another on the street, they exchange this phrase as a greeting. L'amour de Dieu est folie. L'amour de Dieu est folie. L'amour de Dieu est folie. The love of God is folly. It's foolish. It is crazy. In these 5 tapes, I have stuttered and stammered in a halting attempt to hint at the shattering reality of the furious love of God. Like an old gold miner panning the stream of his memories, I have reached back into the scriptures to listen to God's self-disclosure. I've read hundreds of biblical, theological, and spiritual books, seeking deeper understanding of the gospel of grace. I have freely employed story, imagery, poetry, symbolism, and the language of metaphor and prose narrative in an inadequate attempt to communicate something of the passionate love of a passionate God. And I know that I haven't done a very good job of it. But acknowledging my limitations, I'm still not going to be hard on myself, because I know there's going to come a time and there's going to come a place where we can say it all. The secret of the mystery is God is always greater. No matter how great we think him to be, God is always greater. The story goes that Thomas theologian, perhaps the greatest theologian the Christian tradition has ever produced, toward the end of his life, he suddenly stopped writing. When his secretary complained that his work was unfinished, Thomas Aquinas replied, Brother Reginald, when I was at prayer a few months ago, I experienced something of the reality of the love of Jesus Christ. And that day, I lost all appetite for writing. In fact, all I have ever written about Christ seems now to me to be like straw. My friends, only the person who has experienced it can begin to understand what the love of Jesus Christ really is. L'amour de Dieu est folie. L'amour de Dieu est folie. It is folly, and it reaches out to ragamuffins everywhere. My only exhortation is, let us walk together. My only prayer, may Jesus Christ convert us to the folly of his gospel. Let me say a word in closing. After listening to these 5 tapes, this series entitled The Victorious Life, The Victorious Limp, a thoughtful reader might ruminate, well, Brennan made a few good points, but the whole 5 hours seems so one-sided. And Brennan goes on and on about Abba, Jesus, radical grace, compassion, the furious love of God, God loving with magnificent monotony. But he says so little about morality. Maybe his cheese is sliding off his cracker. I think he stacked the deck. If you're thinking that, I heartily agree. The Bible is the love story of God with his people. God calls, pursues, forgives, and heals. Our response to his love is itself his gift. Let's suppose that you advance me $1 million for my personal needs. A year later, you request that I begin to make monthly interest-free payments of $10,000 each. On the first day of the month, I sit down to write the check, and just then the morning mail arrives. You've sent me a $10,000 check to cover my payment. And you continue this practice until the full amount of my debt is relieved. I'm bewildered, and I protest, wait a minute, time out. This is totally lopsided. The gospel of grace cries out, l'amour de Dieu est folie, the love of God is folly. God is so enamored with his people and so intent upon a response that he even provides the grace to respond. As Paul writes in Ephesians 1, may he enlighten your innermost vision, that you may know the great hope to which he has called you, the wealth of his glorious heritage to be distributed among the members of his church, and the immeasurable scope of his power in us who believe. The love of God is simply unimaginable. In Ephesians 3, may Christ dwell in your hearts through faith, and may love be the root and foundation of your life. Then you'll be able to grasp fully, with all the saints, the breadth, the length, the height, the depth of Christ's love, which is beyond all knowledge. Do you hear what Paul is saying? The love of Christ is beyond all knowledge, till you're filled with the utter fullness of God. Do we really hear what Paul is saying? Stretch, man, stretch. Let go of your impoverished, circumscribed, finite, limited, human understanding of God, because the love of Christ is beyond all knowledge, anything we can ever intellectualize or imagine. The love of Jesus is not a mild benevolence, it is a consuming fire. Jesus is so unbearably forgiving, so infinitely patient, and so relentlessly loving, that he provides us with the resources we need to live lives of gracious response. And so Paul cries out, glory be to him whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. My friends, does it sound like an easy religion? Well, you might mention that to Paul, who wrote, the love of Christ impels us, or to the Apostle John, the evangelist, who in the gathering mist of old age, on the island of Patmos, spoke with magnificent monotony of the love of Jesus Christ. The love of God has its own exigencies, its own demands, its own requirements. It weighs and counts nothing, but expects everything. And perhaps that explains our reluctance to risk, our skittishness with God's love, our uneasiness with the gospel of grace. We know only too well that the gospel of grace, the ragamuffin gospel, is an irresistible call to love the same way. Small wonder so many of us elect to surrender our soul to the control of rules rather than run the risk of living in union with love. No greater sinners exist than those so-called Christians who disfigure the face of God, mutilate the gospel of grace, and intimidate others through fear. They corrupt the essential nature of Christianity. In Eugene Peterson's forceful phrase, they are telling lies about God, and let them be cursed. Jesus fought against the fixers who sent people sagging under great spools of rules and regulations and then refused to lift a finger to help them. All these centuries later, they are still with us. The fixers want to make us afraid, return us to the bondage of law. They want us to live by an alien gospel and hand over our freedom to falsehood. Peterson writes, one of the wickedest things one person can do to others is to lie to them about God, to represent God as other or less than he is. It is wicked to tell a person that God is an angry tyrant out there to get every trespasser and throw him into a lake of fire. If we believe that God is an angry tyrant, we're going to be defensive and avoid him the best we can. God has the first and the last word. History shows that people who live and believe in response to the good news are not naive innocents, but the most clear-sighted realists. We are called to freedom. We will not abandon the free life of the gospel. Let those people who tell lies about God be cursed. The end of Peterson's quote. My brothers and sisters, the issue is momentous. The North American church is at a critical juncture. The gospel of grace is being confused and compromised by silence, seduction, and outright subversion. The vitality of faith is being jeopardized. The lying slogans of the fixers, who carry religion like a sword of judgment, pile up with impunity. Let ragamuffins everywhere across this land gather together as a confessing church to cry out in protest. Revoke the licenses of religious leaders who falsify the idea of God. Sentence them to 3 years in solitude with the Bible as their only companion. Mary Magdalene stands as a witness par excellence to the ragamuffin gospel, to the victorious limp. On Good Friday, she watched as the man she loved with all her heart and soul and mind and strength got blown away in the most brutal and dehumanizing fashion. But the focus of Magdalene's attention throughout the passion and death was not suffering, but the suffering Christ, who, as Paul writes in Galatians, loved me and delivered himself up for me. Never allow these words, he loved me and delivered himself up for me, be interpreted as allegory in the life of Mary Magdalene. The love of Jesus Christ was a burning and divine reality to that woman, and her life is utterly incomprehensible except in terms of it. She would have been buried in history as some unknown hooker, except for her immense, passionate, uncompromising love for the person of Jesus. Magdalene has no understanding of God, church, religion, prayer, or ministry, except in terms of the sacred man who loved her and delivered himself up for her. The unique place that Magdalene occupies in the history of discipleship owes not to her mysterious love for Jesus, but to the miraculous transformation that his love wrought in her life. She stood there on Calvary and simply let herself be loved. The central truth for which Mary Magdalene's life stands is that it's possible to be delivered through love from the lowest depths to the shining heights where God dwells. What did Paul say? Where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. When Jesus asked Peter on the Tiberian seashore, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Jesus added nothing else. Simon, son of John, do you love me? That was enough. Do you love me? Can you allow my love to touch you in your weakness, set you free, and empower you there? After that moment, the only power that Peter had was Jesus' love for him and his love for Jesus. He told and retold the story of his own unfaithfulness and how Jesus had touched him. When Peter proclaimed the gospel of grace, he preached from his weakness the power of God. That's what converted the Roman world, and what will convert us and the people around us if they see that the love of Christ has touched us. The confessing church of American ragamuffins joined Magdalene and Peter in witnessing that Christianity is not primarily a moral code, but a grace-laden mystery. It is not essentially a philosophy of life, but a love affair. It is not keeping rules with clenched fists, but receiving a gift with open hands. It is not for legalists, preening ascetics, or pretenders in the spirit, but for the wobbly and the weak-kneed who know they don't have it all together and are not too proud to accept the handout of Amazing Grace. Several years ago, the renowned evangelical theologian Francis Schaeffer wrote these words: "True spirituality consists in living moment to moment by the grace of Jesus Christ." My friends, the set of tapes, The Victorious Limp, lays no claim to originality. These tapes are simply a commentary on Schaeffer's statement. True spirituality consists in living moment to moment by the grace of Jesus Christ. As C.S. Lewis is fond of saying, people need more to be reminded than to be instructed. In closing, let me say this. If somewhere in listening to these 5 tapes, God has spoken to your heart or ministered to your spirit, I am indeed a happy man. And the effort I put forth here is amply rewarded. But if nothing happened, your heart wasn't ministered to, your spirit wasn't moved, then it would make me very happy if you'd mark these tapes down to $1 and drop them off at the Salvation Army. God bless you, my friends, as we limp victoriously along the way.